thanks. We will just start a light conversation while people are continuously joining in. And from experience, they'll join in the next couple of 5 minutes. I'll introduce myself, and we'll say hello to the two speakers who are here. Initially, this is a very informal space where we are hoping for, of course, there's a presentation, but also a couple of discussion and questions along the way. This is being recorded and will be available afterwards if anyone wants to share this as well. This fora is called DIN, which is a Digital Identity Nordics. It's let's call it an initiative in the Nordics, trying to focus on building the SSI knowledge, also doing research papers with research institutions, and trying to get the initiative of getting Norway to understand that their identity solutions are great, but there's something even better, which is called SSI, which IOTA and Wilfred and Jelle has understood, and they will introduce us to how they approach their technology and their understanding of this new technology called SSI. Wilfred, we can begin with you. You can say hello.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Wilfred Pimenta. I'm based in the Oslo region. I work at the IOTA Foundation since 2016, so prior to the inception. That was back in 2017. And I've been working mainly on the business development side, partnership relations. As a director initially, more globally, and in the past 8 months, I've been more focusing on the Nordics. So I'll share some thoughts around what we do in the Nordics, and then I'll hand over the presentation to Jelle, who will talk more around the digital ID.
Perfect. You can introduce yourself, Jelle.
Hi, I'm Jelle Millenaar. I'm the lead identity at the IOTA Foundation, which means I lead the development of the self-sovereign identity framework that we're building, but also help to maintain the adoption across our corporate partners and our community. I'll be talking a little bit more about the IOTA technology and our self-sovereign identity framework.
Perfect. Thanks. As a follow-up, if you are interested in more information about SSI, on the link you guys received via the DIN, there's also an agenda, which is a rolling agenda. It has recordings of other initiatives and other informations and other discussions along the way. So if you're really enjoying this type of technology and want to dig deeper, there's more information, or you can always probably reach out to Jelle. He can probably answer the questions to you as well. So I think we can kick off the beginning. Who of you is going to start?
So I'll get started with a brief about IOTA and what we do in the Nordics, and then I'll hand over to Jelle.
Then I'll stop sharing my screen and you can take over.
Oh, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. So let's get started. So today we'll be speaking about the IOTA Foundation, doing a brief about the IOTA in Norway, and we'll review the IOTA technology and the latest updates before we dive in the identity framework that touches upon self-sovereign identity. So the IOTA Foundation, to begin with, we are a non-for-profit foundation. We were set up in 2017 for the purpose of developing open source DLT, which is a bigger bucket in which blockchain belongs, but we have built something slightly different. We provide technology or technical advisory support services for various research, innovation, and application development. Altogether, we are 130 employees now, 25 countries, so we are very decentralized, just like our technology. And our main sort of deliverable as a foundation is the IOTA Tangle. It's an open source DLT. We like to refer beyond blockchain in order to sort of overcome some of the limitations that we've seen in the conventional blockchain protocol architectures. There's a mainnet that is live and it's going through different upgrades that we'll talk about. And we have a large ecosystem of parties around IOTA. So IOTA is being developed truly through collaboration with standardization bodies, research, academia, industrial partners of both public and private sector. So there's a growing number of collaborations going on. There's also patents from industry partners that are intending to leverage on the technology for real-world applications. And we have a growing number of academic references. The technology is quite complex and introduces radical new approaches to DLT and associated consensus. So we do this collaboration jointly with research academics. Our general vision is to enable the Internet of Things economy. We started to talk a lot about machine-to-machine economy from a digital trust and a payment perspective. And over time, we've broadened a bit the spectrum of application to include things like self-sovereign identity. The bigger blocks, if we want to understand the type of problem statements we're trying to address, they fall, if we simplify a bit, in three bigger buckets. The first one is digital trust, and that relates to how in today's or tomorrow's cyber-physical environment, very distributed, fed through the IoT, we need to ensure data integrity, and that's a sort of a way to ensure that the data that is being shared across is indeed the data that was generated from the edge, to ensure that we have a trustworthy data environment. As part of that bucket of activity, we find also things related to privacy preserving mechanisms and the general need for doing cross-silo data sharing through consent management. And IOTA tackles this bucket as an open source DLT. We are a permissionless DLT, but in our case, we are not necessarily imposing the use of cryptocurrencies, which you often find in conventional blockchains. So digital trust is a bucket where you can truly leverage on the immutability of the ledger without necessarily being exposed to cryptocurrencies. The second bucket is data monetization, and this is where you find things like digital assets. We have a cryptocurrency called the IOTA, which is running on the ledger, and you can utilize it for very interesting applications such as machine-to-machine payment. So going towards this idea of allowing data marketplaces and doing real-time payment for data streaming. And to embrace the full vision of our work is that we aim at fueling automation. Tomorrow's cyber-physical environments and smart cities, for example, will be working in real time, and we will help automate all those processes eventually towards data marketplaces and introducing concepts such as smart contracts. In that domain also, we are trying to bridge the human to the machine, so machine being the IoT, and we'll over time introduce things such as delegation of rights, things so that we can empower the machine to act on our behalf for different types of actuation or even payment. And as we did our work in the past years, we've done quite a lot of proof of concept development. There's applied research and innovation projects, some of which are taking place in Norway. But we have, like, to simplify a bit, some interesting bigger buckets of innovation that are appearing. One of them is related to the My Data space and the data sovereignty that Europe in particular is very keen to push forward. This is about empowering the end user in managing its data for different purposes. Here, there's examples around how we can have, in the healthcare domain, patient remote monitoring or approaching health COVID passports, but then it can stretch to, human-machine interactions. So we'll talk about this. And on the other side of the spectrum, a lot of people are looking at the digital economy now, also in Norway, with all sort of new strategies. And here we can see IOTA being utilized as an open source standard to part of the digital infrastructure of data marketplaces, urban data platforms, for example, to allow eventually things that will even be decentralized. So decentralized data marketplaces. And we utilize the ledger, so the DLT, as a single source of truth, so that all the participants, although they are independent and running their independent business, they can all rely on a sort of common trust layer represented by the IOTA ledger. So in between those two buckets, there's a lot of interesting use cases that are being investigated, and that goes really across all sorts of sectors. Those are just a few examples of the type of work we do. We work on sustainability, working with digital monitoring, reporting, and verification related to climate data. So if you have, for example, an energy power plant where you have CO2 emissions and you want to be able to track, monitor those emissions in a trustworthy fashion, you can use IoT combined with IOTA. And we do projects sponsored by Canadian government and in partnership with different partners like Climate Check. We work in the electromobility and related smart infrastructure, where, for example, Jaguar Land Rover is developing a car wallet technology to allow machine-to-machine payment so that the vehicle can transact data with its environment back and forth, either for charging at smart chargers or getting paid, for example, for the vehicle detecting potholes in the street, reporting this information to the relevant authorities that would then reward the vehicle for sharing that data. In the domain of smart cities and positive energy districts, we work on different fronts. We're part also of the TM Forum. This is a global alliance of telcos, but we have also done a project, we're still ongoing, called the Positive City Exchange. This is a Horizon 2020 project managed by NTNU that brings together 32 partners, including municipalities, academics, industrial partners, and NGOs. We, in that context, provide a digital trust layer and investigating new means of payment so that altogether we create local energy markets. It's the ability to empower smart districts with a local peer-to-peer energy marketplace. And this work is currently being also spin-off as part of a Norwegian venture that I manage. We work also in supporting trade infrastructure with different type of partners in Trademark East Africa, but also with Zebra, which is more an infrastructure provider with different type of equipment that we're enabling thanks to IOTA. And then again, secure digital identities, and I will let Yele further in the presentation present what we do there. So it's quite a broad spectrum. Initially, I think our work was sort of associated or interpreted as being very niche, linked to the IoT. I think since we started now, IoT has been demystified and people understand that it's not a niche, but it's really exposing every single industry in the market. So it's really part of this Industry 4.0 transformation. And going forward, it will be a bit more than this because we are transforming this new industrial environment as an economy. So having automated machine-to-machine economy. But as part of all this, of course, we've learned a lot that when we get into the real-time domain, we need to tackle personal data. And that has been a very natural bridge for us to expand in digital identity. We have this partnership ecosystem I mentioned earlier with a lot of different type of work, and that provides a sort of basis for engagement, of course, depending of where you are sitting. If you are sitting as part of academia or industry, we're happy to collaborate, and then we have different approaches to doing that. To simplify, we can see this broken down in 4 bigger buckets. That's DLT research. We collaborate, for example, with the University in Oslo on that aspect, especially on digital identity. We work on education and training, so that's through projects, but we are keen also to work with universities in bringing really concrete curriculum. We are also sponsored by the EU Commission as part of a Horizon 2020 project focusing only on blockchain education. So we are together with partners building up a virtual academic curriculum that will go live in the incoming year. Open ecosystem, so that goes all across from standardization bodies to all the way to startups and enterprises. And finally, in partnerships, we like to have also a focused approach. So some of our partners are very dedicated to integrate IOTA as part of their solution stack. And so here we have very focused partnerships attached to that. And a snapshot around some of the work we do in Norway, for example, to illustrate this. we've been doing some work through the City Exchange project and some data marketplace initiative back in 2017 with NTNU. And that work continues on the smart city and energy economics side of things. This is related to NTNU mainly in Trondheim. And we work also with the University in Oslo on core research digital identity. And so Yele had the opportunity also to get interaction with the University in Oslo, and is also looking at scaling a bit their activity around blockchain. So we're happy to support that. We've done some interesting POCs and, let's say, showcases in Norway. So we leverage also on the advanced digitalization of the nation in general and municipalities to bring some of our partners like Jaguar Land Rover to connect their vehicle to the digital infrastructure of cities, and work with, for instance, with NG, the research center in Paris, to kind of develop new concepts. Some of these have been framed around more formal engagements. So that's the case of City Exchange I mentioned earlier, but also DigIT, which is related to human-centered Internet of Things for the mining industry. So we have a test bed in Mo i Rana up in the north, and Sintef is engaged into working on that front. In the past, we also worked, for example, on Future Farm. So this is a consortium including Tine and Yara and some others related to digitalizing the supply chain for the agriculture domain. And we have investigated different type of models and peer-to-peer marketplaces to help monetize the data sharing in that industry. And on the day-to-day, we work also with a company that I manage now, Alpha Venturi, which is a Norwegian-established co-innovation and venture studio, so that can take up different concepts. We also spinning off the City Exchange project into a specific venture now that is now finding its way through other grants with other industry partners. And this will anchor through Norwegian venture startup incubation. So that's the bigger picture on, let's say, the IOTA environment and what we do a bit in Norway. And then I wanted to bring Yele to maybe introduce a bit more what we're doing on the tech side and the identity front. So Yele, if you're online.
I am. Yeah, let me try and take over the screen.
Okay, I'll shift and I'll let you do that, so it will be more handy.
Thank you. All right. Are you guys now seeing my screen instead?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So yeah, I would like to talk about IOTA Identity, our self-sovereign identity framework on top of IOTA. But before we do that, I would also like to talk a little bit more about how IOTA exactly works, since it has some different traits to blockchain that we really utilize with our self-sovereign identity framework. So yeah, to start with that, let's actually draw a quick comparison between blockchain and IOTA, which is not a blockchain, but is a distributed ledger technology. So blockchain was really invented to be like this decentralized, immutable data storage, which ended up being perfect for a cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin. And in order to take part in this, to have anything immutable be uploaded to the ledger, you need to send a transaction which is put inside a block. And this block is proposed by a leader in the network, and through a consensus algorithm, you decide the leader, so leadership selection. This leader then decides which transactions go in that block, and in order to be on the front row, you can basically bid your way up and you get this fee market due to the fact that this block is very limited, and that created a bottleneck. So we have a very nice decentralized and immutable solution, which is blockchain, but due to the bottleneck that has been created, you introduce a fee that can actually explode quite a bit if the throughput is high or the demand is high, but the throughput is actually quite limited depending on the exact block size and space in the block. So IOTA that you see here on the right kind of takes a completely different approach in how transactions are added to the ledger, and we have parallelized this system where transactions can kind of attach anywhere to what we call the tangle. So these are individual transactions coming in, and they reference 2 older transactions in order to become part of the network. Recently, we actually updated that you can also reference between 1 and 8 transactions. But the point is that this bottleneck has been removed, and that allows the network to become feeless, because there's no need for this whole leadership selection algorithm in the first place. And at the same time, we also increase the throughput of the system. And this feeless aspect is exactly why IOTA could be a very powerful place to build a self-sovereign identity framework on, because there's no requirement to own any cryptocurrency or any money at all, so to say, in order to take part in a self-sovereign identity solution, which is hopefully as inclusive as you can get, which is something, of course, that we strive for with self-sovereign identity as a whole. So yeah, IOTA has gone through quite a few updates, and we still have quite a few updates planned. So if you are familiar with IOTA back in the days, you are probably familiar with the old concepts of IOTA 1.0. We've recently updated to IOTA 1.5 that we dubbed Chrysalis. But there's also one more update, Corticide, and I will briefly talk about all 3 stages in order to show where we came from, where we are right now, and where we're going as a technology. So IOTA 1.0 was designed by very visionary leaders that we have in IOTA, and they thought ahead a little bit too far. So we got really cool features such as a ternary design, which is, instead of just ones and zeros with binary, we also had -1s, which is theoretically speaking the most optimal way that a computer can process and store information. Unfortunately, that hardware just plainly doesn't exist right now to support that. So it actually introduced a little bit of a conversion cost to the network at all times. At the same time, we were already thinking ahead with quantum-proof signatures in order to not be vulnerable against quantum computing. But that too brought some difficulties to the network, where you could only use an address once, which kind of meant that you have to, every time that you spend money, you have to send the rest to a new address, which can be a little bit bothersome. And at the same time, there was an idea for a consensus mechanism that doesn't work really on a low throughput. So we introduced a coordinator as a temporary measure to guide the consensus in the network. So basically what it does, it's an IOTA Foundation run node that it used to be every 30 to 90 seconds would put in a special transaction on the network called a milestone, and every transaction directly or indirectly referenced by this milestone would be from that point on immutable. This coordinator would, of course, make sure that no double spends are part of that transaction set, or any other rules would be broken by the network. If the coordinator would decide to try and break such a rule, the network could just decide to no longer follow the coordinator. So with a blockchain, you kind of create a fork at that point. But with IOTA, we slightly have the downside that if this happens, the network just no longer has a consensus mechanism. So obviously, the coordinator is a temporary measure, and that's something we want to keep. So we have evolved from that already quite a bit. So we have introduced the Chrysalis update in 2 phases, which we have both put live at this point. The last phase being went live in April. And we kind of went back on some of these decisions that we've made as the IOTA Foundation, initially that were like too far in the future. So we went back to binary to remove the conversion costs already. We rewrote our entire node software basically 2 times. We built the Hornet node, which is from the mostly developed by the IOTA community, and we ourselves built the B node. So we now have 2 node softwares, which is obviously, if any bug is introduced in one node software, at least the other node software survives. We also went back to a more classic signature scheme, which is just industry-wide supported, which is ED 25519. And this is, for example, also used by other popular blockchains like Ethereum. And yeah, that did remove the quantum secure feature that we had, but we've also made it so that we can introduce new signature schemes quite easily in the future. So whenever something gets approved, like by the industry in terms of a quantum secure signature scheme, IOTA will probably be one of the first to adopt that. Yeah, on top of that, we've also switched programming languages to completely focus on Rust. Rust is a young and innovative language that is really focused on performance, but also security, which is, of course, ideal for a DLT environment in general. And then on top of that, we provide bindings, which are kind of code conversions from Rust to other programming languages, such as the APIs can be used in other languages as well. So you can develop perfectly fine with JavaScript, Python, C, etc. on top of IOTA. So all in all, this update has a massive improvement for the IOTA network, where we came from this 20 to 30 transactions per second. We are now up to supporting 1,000 transactions per second successfully in a stress test. And the confirmation times also went down significantly as the milestones are issued quite more frequent, all the way up to 10 seconds. And the coordinator is better at picking up more recent transactions. So confirmation time is about, on average, 10 seconds now, which is, of course, a lot better for a distributed ledger technology. But there's one, of course, big step yet to be made, which is core decide. And this is where IOTA will be truly, completely decentral. So the last step, of course, is the consensus mechanism. And I would briefly like to explain that of what we're trying to do. But this is a huge topic. So if you want to go into the details, there are absolutely amazing papers written by our research team. And you can, of course, reach out to them as well. But my short summary of it is that it is a little bit similar to the idea of delegated proof of stake. So proof of stake basically means that there's consensus based on how much stake you have in the network, which is often translated to basically how much money do you have in the network. And the more money you have, the more consensus power you have. And then what the delegated part adds to it is that if anyone doesn't really care about consensus, or if they just would like to empower someone else to make these consensus decisions for you, you can do that. So you can delegate your voting rights. But it works slightly different with IOTA. We use what our research team invented, the fast probabilistic consensus mechanism, which is basically the idea that consensus isn't achieved by these miners, but more so by the nodes directly. So nodes just accept transactions as long as they follow a specific set of rules. And once two conflicting transactions are spotted, basically the nodes will start voting rounds. So initially they will just tell their opinion. They either prefer the teal colored transaction in this particular GIF or the purple one. And they probably decide this first opinion based on whichever transaction they saw first. And basically, they will share their opinion with their direct neighbors. And their neighbors will also share their opinion with them. So what happens if the majority of the neighbors actually have a different opinion than you, you should probably change your opinion because you might be wrong. And if you do that process, I believe about 7 to 10 times, then generally speaking, you receive a network-wide consensus already. And this takes about, I believe, 10 to 15 seconds to resolve, but don't quote me on that. And yeah, that's basically the general idea of our decentralized consensus mechanism. But these votes are not just votes from the node, they are also weighted votes. And this is where the proof of stake idea comes in, that basically the more consensus power you have, the more your vote counts. And consensus power is achieved by gaining what we call mana. So mana is essentially pledged to node identities. And it's basically the idea that when someone sends IOTA across the network, they, let's say they spend 1 million IOTA, then they will also assign 1 million mana, most likely to the node that they're using, as kind of a thank you from, like, you've done me a service by introducing my transaction to the network, and therefore I give you mana. And from this point onwards, that node now has a little bit more consensus power because you have delegated your vote as a token holder to that node. However, if you then spend your 1 million IOTA again, let's say you send it to yourself, so you're able to spend it again, and you choose a different node, then you reassign your mana to that other node. So the previous node loses that mana, and the new node now receives that mana. So this consensus power is kind of fluid, and it goes to the nodes that are really active in the network. There's one way to guarantee that you will keep your mana as a node, and that's actually by owning the tokens yourself. So if you want to have consensus power, all you have to do is purchase some IOTA tokens and assign the mana to your own node. And then when you no longer need this consensus power, or you're no longer interested, you can still sell your IOTAs, and hopefully for you, nothing of value is lost. There's one more mechanism to this. For those that don't really care about mana, there's also, they don't care about the consensus power. There's a second reason to have this mana, which is to actually fix the congestion problem. In blockchain, the congestion problem is solved by bidding for higher fees to enable to be part of the network. But if you have a feeless network, you can imagine that spam becomes a real big problem. So our congestion control algorithm also uses this mana. And it's basically the idea that if a node has more mana, it will have more guaranteed throughput in the network. So let's say you have 1% of the active mana. That means you should also have about 1% of the active throughput on the network available for you at all times. So it doesn't matter how many people spam the network, you will get kind of priority queue for that 1% of throughput. And that gives you a guaranteed throughput, which for companies is often a hard requirement, that they have a stable throughput and they can rely on that. So all they have to do is basically rent or purchase a specific amount of mana in order to have that throughput for them available at all times. And again, when you no longer need the throughput, you can just sell the tokens, or you can reassign the mana as you please. So it's still feeless, but there's of course the ability to purchase this throughput and then sell it at a later point again. So it's kind of an all-you-can-eat model versus a pay-per-transactions model. Yeah, that's a little bit of a short overview of our Corticide project. And that is, of course, really when IOTA goes completely decentralized. But yeah, we have made great progress in this. There's already a testnet up and running with most of the parts fully functional. Yeah, that's soon moving forward as well. So that's a little bit about IOTA. Let's move on towards the self-sovereign identity framework. So yeah, we also created IOTA Identity as a second layer framework on top of IOTA. And this kind of tries to tackle the standard self-sovereign identity question and problems that most of the people in this space are trying to solve. But in some cases, we try to take it one step further. So for example, when we look at the trust problem on the internet that we try to solve, a lot of self-sovereign identity implementations are focused on this very human-focused to create online identification for people and allow access to services, etc. And quite a few are also focused on the whole GDPR question, where companies no longer want to store data due to the fact that there are so many privacy regulations that at some point is starting to become a burden to hold people's data. So those are two problems that we, of course, also take very serious. But as is the nature with IOTA, we also have our IoT focus as well, where we try to also have a look for self-sovereign identity for devices in order to improve their security, but also the trustworthiness of these devices. The idea being that there's already a lot of data gathered around IoT devices, but this is not shared very often, nor do we make a lot of decisions based on this data just yet, due to the fact that it is not trusted. And that is, again, a self-sovereign identity fixable problem. So you kind of see this split into three categories for identities: people, organizations, and devices. So for people, indeed, being able to control your own identity and your own data, with a maximum focus on privacy is, of course, still a big focus of ours. For organizations, possibly having access to data temporarily from their customers, but not having to control that, is actually a massive improvement to this burden of responsibility. And for IoT devices, it's all about being able to create an identity for yourself and start to collect more digital statements about such an IoT device to increase the trust in its sensory readings. For example, you can prove who has placed an IoT sensor, who has manufactured it, who has installed the software. Perhaps there are even reviews about how the data has been used and if it is turning out to be trustworthy data. This kind of online.
Come with a question in this.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So in relation to IoT for devices, do you guys see that collaboration with Land Rover and this will come into play, or like do you see that there's a synergy there?
Definitely, we see with quite a lot of our partners that self-sovereign identity is actually one of the main topics that they're looking at. I'm not going to go into like specifics of what partners said what, but overall, most of the projects quickly realize that self-sovereign identity on an IoT level can be very interesting for them as well, or for some just on the more classical personal or organizational level. And for example, the MOBI initiative in Europe has developed a vehicle identity standard, which is based on the DID standard from W3C, and kind of extends upon that to give cars their own identities as well, and that they can kind of have this history about the car's maintenance, kind of a birth certificate, etc. as well. So we see this coming back in mobility as well. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Yeah, and then what we find really important with IOTA identity is to create this one framework for all of these different applications on all the three sectors. And this will make interoperability between these sectors very easy. For example, a person could walk up to a car that they would like to rent, and instead of having to sign up for some kind of services, etc., it could directly prove towards the car that it owns a driver's license and that it is insured. And at the same time, the car can prove that it has been maintained, that it is legal, maybe what kind of battery charge it has left, back to the user. And at that point, you have a very fluent interaction, and the person can just embark in the car and drive away, renting it out. So these kind of fluid interactions become as easy as possible if you use one single framework for all of that. Yeah, of course, we use for this the W3C standards for decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. We also use more detailed standards that are inspired on top of that, such as the DITCOM standard being developed by the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and other. We also take, of course, inspiration of other large projects like Hyperledger Aries as well. But this general setup of verifiable credentials and decentralized identities that you're probably familiar with if you're part of DIN as well, is of course what we use as well. So I will skip this slide unless there are very specific questions about that. Then I can always come back to it.
I have a question. If you're not going to go into DIDCOM, but how far or how has your experience been with DIDCOM and testing it out and using it in certain scenarios?
Yeah, it's been a little bit tough, to be honest, due to the fact that it is such a young topic. There's of course already a lot of information produced by DIF on how it should be implemented and how it should be working. But we also see, for example, that Aries, which has the older version of that standard, had some different ideas on some topics that we also really liked. So kind of the end conclusion that we came to is that we built an initial DITCOM implementation that is very much inspired by the standard, but can be different in some parts. And once the standard has been more stabilized, and also when we hopefully start contributing to that standard, we can always create a very easy conversion bridge between IOTA identity DITCOM messages and DITCOM standardized messages, which could be a very easy conversion, like a slightly different JSON, for example. So it's been a little bit tough, but also very cool to take that next much needed step with identity.
Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah, so what makes IOTA identity unique? What are our kind of unique selling points? So definitely also the team, as Will has already described. As a nonprofit, of course, we do everything open source, and we have a very dedicated team to build out IOTA identity, which is really focused on open source technology and having a positive impact on the world, and not having this big focus on also monetizing the systems, for example. Besides that, IOTA is very scalable and also energy efficient due to the fact that we don't use a proof of work consensus mechanism. So we are also green DLT. What I personally find a very big upside, as I've already mentioned, is the fact that you don't need to purchase, hold, or use any cryptocurrency token, while it is a completely permissionless and public network. So it's really easy to use. If you run one of our example scripts, you'll be able to produce an IOTA identity, or a DID, on top of IOTA in, well, as long as it takes you to start running the example, and about 5 seconds later, you can see it registered on the IOTA main network without having to consider any cryptocurrencies. So it allows you to experiment and build in a production-ready environment immediately, which hopefully enables more self-sovereign identity products and applications to more easily find adoption. And we really try to bring home that idea of making IOTA identity as easy to use. So we try to provide a very high-level API besides a low-level API that takes away a lot of the concerns and difficulties around identity, and even try to help with standard questions such as, how do I secure a private key? So we provide an out-of-the-box solution using the Stronghold project in IOTA, which is basically a standard way on how to handle private keys in a secure manner, which follows all of the security standards that you should follow yourself as well when you build such an application. And lastly, of course, IOTA identity and self-sovereign identity. In general, we really would like to be interoperable. So far, we were a little bit silent in the self-sovereign identity community. So if you are a big part of that, such as in the DIN network, you might not have heard of us yet. That's because we were a little bit late to the party. So we wanted to focus on developing this framework first. But now that we are in a beta stage and working towards a 1.0 release, we want to collaborate more and get more active in the self-sovereign identity community, and not just implementing standards, but also giving back and helping extending these standards as well. Create bridges with other implementations, and hopefully taking a nice spot alongside some of the other nice self-sovereign identity frameworks out there. That's a little bit of our vision on how we would like to tackle that.
Have you guys had any look at the Silicon Valley innovation programs latest deliveries?
No, probably not actually. Are you referring to anything specific?
Oh yeah, like they have Homeland Security initiated a project which they call the SWIP, Silicon Valley Innovation Program, which pulls in about 7 or 8 of the organizations who deliver decentralized identity today, and put them in together and deliver basically a lot of use cases, but a pipeline where everyone can switch out whatever they want. So basically, they're showcasing that, hey, interoperability is one of the most important things we focus on, because they pull in 7 organizations where everyone should fit in every place, and they do use cases from everything to restricted purchase or oil, or yeah, pretty much everything. I can put the link to a recording from earlier here on the left side. But there you have Manu, one of the writers of this different standards, presenting from his point of view, which is he is part of that project with his company Digital Bazaar, and there's a lot of other companies such as some of the most prolific standard contributors in that project. So that there the focus is interoperability, because Homeland Security said, hey, we do not want to have lock-in effect when we purchase software. How do we get there, and how can we kind of solve this problem we have today? And then they made this project and kept funding different scenarios.
Awesome. Yeah, I was not aware of it. I'm definitely going to check it out. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we are now more interested in, now that we have reached the maturity where this interoperability becomes possible. So yeah, I'll definitely have a look and see maybe if we can take part as well.
Absolutely.
Sounds really cool. All right. So yeah, some of the projects or the things that we envision on how self-sovereign identity can be used, I'd like to go through a few of those. So at the start of the COVID unfortunate reality, we actually very quickly saw that that self-sovereign identity could actually really help out in that situation. So we already released a demo in April of 2020, showcasing that self-sovereign identity could be a perfect way to create a privacy-preserving way of handling your own test results, COVID test results, in order to, for example, showcase access to or showcase that you've been tested and therefore go back to work or something like that. So we made a demo for that, which is still you can find on self.iota.org. It has a full app with it and a nice scenario which is fully explained on how it works as well. And at the same time, it was also an educational tool for us to showcase the power of self-sovereign identity in general. We've already advanced this idea with our partner Zebra, where we showcase that this could, of course, also be used for vaccinations. With self-sovereign identity or any of these kind of solutions where you have to prove your test results or your vaccination status, you want to be very inclusive. So we didn't want to provide only a mobile-based solution, but Zebra also enabled an NFC card-based solution where you could store your verifiable credentials on an NFC card and then have that be scanned by any of their Zebra handheld NFC scanners, or even just a very simple app on any handheld device. So again, as long as IOTA identity is the underlying layer, or if we created an interoperability with other SSI frameworks, you create this interoperable framework that should easily be usable across borders, across even European, beyond European borders as well, and very much falls in line with the European initiatives in this direction. They basically have set up the same system that they're working towards. The only difference being that they have their centralized public key infrastructures on a per country basis, while we showcase that this could be done in a completely decentralized network such as IOTA or another SSI framework, of course, to don't make it any more difficult to enable this kind of setup across borders. Another thing that we are really looking into, and which is very popular, is the idea of kind of this single sign-on idea, but then for the entire internet. The whole passwords and login names, account names is a really outdated model in a way, and of course very insecure, because most people are not the best at managing their passwords as they should, and creating a single sign-on experience for the entire internet based on self-sovereign identity could be a very powerful way of, again, securing your own data very well, but also be less reliant on the centralized parties such as Google or Facebook for a federate version of a login system. Another layer is what we're looking at is the know your customer side of things. So right now you sign up for example, financial services, and this can take about a week to go through the KYC, which is know your customer, but also the anti-money laundering regulations. And every time you sign up, this process has to be repeated at any different financial service entity. Especially for those that do actually deal with cryptocurrencies, you might be aware with how difficult it is to sign up to a cryptocurrency exchange. What we hope is that we can, that self-sovereign identity in general can provide reusable KYC services, and then signing up to a cryptocurrency exchange, but also to a bank, to an insurance company, or anything like that, anything that requires KYC could be at a click of a button, instantly having all your data be verified and having access to the service directly. I also briefly mentioned already the vehicle identities, so I'm going to skip over that for a little bit. And yeah, overall, the real vision is that we would like to see self-sovereign identity be enabled across entire smart cities, where people can easily interact with the infrastructure, with all of the devices, cars, any infrastructure that exists in a very privacy-first focused and GDPR compliant manner, where all the data is also marked trustworthy. We're not talking only about people, but also enabling vehicles to start sharing their data with each other, allowing a smart city, for example, to better predict and act upon how they should manage their traffic through their cities, improving or at least reducing the carbon emission and improving the vehicle throughput in cities as well, as data becomes more trustworthy using identities and verifiable credentials. So this massive vision we would like to make happen through IOTA identity, but of course also by collaborations and interoperability with other self-sovereign identity implementations and frameworks. Yeah, that's it from my side. I'd love to spend maybe the last minutes for some questions, either to Will or myself, or maybe, yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, we have one question in the chat. Is there any mechanism being used to manage identity exhaustion, like specific attacker trying to create many IDs to exhaust the namespace?
So identities are directly derived from public keys. In most cases of self-sovereign identity frameworks. So it's basically the same as trying to generate as many public-private key pairs on any cryptocurrency and trying to find some that have tokens. Theoretically speaking, it's all possible. Theoretically speaking, you can fill the namespace, but in reality, you need so high, immense computational power to generate all of those keys that you will never actually get any hits there that you would have a sharing identity. So yeah, that's already secured in the normal cryptographic manner.
To maybe at some point, luckily enough, maybe create a key that has money on it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think that service has been able to pull out any money yet. But it's just continuously creates keys and then checks if there's any value there and then kind of pulls it out. But that hasn't happened yet. So the namespace is big.
Yeah, I always refer to what's the YouTube channel? 3Blue something brown. They have an excellent video showcasing what the chances are of having a hash collision, and they really visualize it in what the chances are that they are so tiny that you'll probably be convinced that really is not a problem. Let me see if I can try and find the video and link it in the chat.
Yeah, I think I maybe found it. I at least found the right 3 blue, 1 brown.
Yeah, how secure is 256-bit security is the video.
It's linked.
Yeah, you won. Yes.
Oh, perfect. So how many people are you guys in identity team and development here?
Sorry, in the chat, or do you mean the IOTA Foundation?
Oh, how many people are you guys on developing the identity framework in today?
So today we're still at a team of 3, but we are currently recruiting quite a bit to extend that out all the way up till 8. We already have some new hires coming in the next few months, including one starting tomorrow. So yeah, the board is very excited about the self-sovereign identity framework. So we are massively increasing the team in order to deliver on its full potential.
Yeah. That's cool. Wilfred, if you want to, if it's possible to share the slides, people are wanting to have that available afterwards, and I can just put it on the event link.
Yeah, sure, of course.
So we can have that shared there. Is there any questions from the room about self-sovereign identity or IOTA? Everyone is as silent as Norwegians in an open group. What could DIN do for IOTA? So one of the questions is a DIN-ware network in Norway trying to facilitate the understanding and the need for SSI. So we hope that IOTA will be part of that network, so we can have basically say this is one opportunity to go for. But again, if you look at that that link from the TPS meeting in April, the wish for DIN would be that there will be some governmental funding research project which involves multiple actors, so we can enforce the interoperability. Because again, interoperability is the key to self-sovereign identity. And if we all sit in our own little top of a mountain and build, we will not be able to get where we truly want to get.
Yeah, I mean, I can mention some things. Maybe Yele, you have some thoughts, but generally speaking, especially on digital identity, which really is a function of public good, we need to kind of develop ecosystem, or I call those things minimal viable ecosystems of complementary partners to demystify the potential of the technology in practice. So finding problems to be solved and really putting it all together. And I foresee that could be a very interesting pathway where we could, of course, discuss with Dean how we can catalyze that process. We initiated some of those dialogues also, for instance, with the academic domain with University in Oslo, that is also, coming into this as a neutral party, exploring different types of blockchains, and with expertise in digital identity. So in those fields, especially where we will have public-private partnership interest, that will be very interesting to put all those glues together, our partners together, and apply for research applied grants. Yeah. So I'm happy to discuss further on those fronts.
Absolutely. And someone said, what are common use cases? But you did go through some. So if you guys know of any use cases are currently live, if you guys have one that is a real-world implementation of IOTA identity or any SSI system so far, which can kind of showcase the proof of value creation.
So from an IOTA identity perspective, we have nothing that works fully in the real world as we speak. But one of the things that we are seeing is that our partners are starting to implement it as we speak as well. And we have European projects such as EnsureSec implementing IOTA identity directly in their targets as well, which is intended to be software to be used fully. So it is basically being implemented in things as we speak already.
That's cool. And also, I'm just going to link back to that link, IOTA, or DIN link earlier, where you can see a real-world use case with restricted purchase in the US, and also they walk through a real-world use case for oil. So have a look at it, and then I think that's the question so far. Any last comments from you guys? I think we can end it now, and we can have a follow-up per email if there's anything coming in.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak here.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you guys for coming. It's been great, and I really like to see that you are aware of what IOTA and improving the decentralization and jumping on the identity train is really cool. We need more actors, and we all need to focus on interoperability. And I see you guys are focusing on it, so that's really cool. But thanks for coming, guys.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone.